Hi everyone, my name is Carlie Lussenden, and today I am presenting my project on the First Ladies of the United States and their influential role throughout American history. I would like to thank MiraCosta for hosting Omni this year and giving me the opportunity to share research that I'm really excited about. I'm currently enrolled in a Women in History class taught by the very amazing Leslie Doig. I highly recommend her classes, which sparked my idea for presenting research surrounding marginalized groups of people or people I often feel are misrepresented. So then I was thinking maybe along the lines of American presidents or other male leaders, but then I decided that women were probably a little bit more relevant to both my class and what I was interested in. When I was thinking of under-recognized and often misconstrued stereotypes regarding women, I really had to narrow my search from everything about women to maybe issues I felt were a little bit more dismissed or niche, which also didn't narrow down my search very much. So after some browsing on some women's history websites online, I stumbled across a First Ladies exhibit. I was intrigued because from what I had known about First Ladies is that they're often pigeonholed into doing the more domestic work regarding the White House, picking the china sets, the paintings, and you can't forget the iconic Christmas decor that is criticized every year without fail. First Ladies are also heavily criticized for their clothing, as women are in most veins of society, but some reporters take it as seriously as thinking maybe their expression of clothing is a cry for help, which could be true, who knows. And we can't forget the token issue that each First Lady chooses to spend her time working on when she is not hosting parties or finalizing house decor. After digging deeper into the history of the First Ladies, I cannot believe that no one told us that they are way cooler than anyone really ever led us to believe. And I want to tell you all about it. The role of the First Lady is interesting. There is nothing explicit in the Constitution about a president's partner's role, so these women have had the ability to form the role they wanted, to an extent. I believe these expectations for the everyday woman translated heavily into the role, which created a dichotomy between a powerful woman and also meeting the gender expectations of the time period. But over time, women have seen the opportunity that has been given to them, and they could change how women were perceived and how they could operate in such a highly regarded office. First Ladies like Martha Washington focused their efforts on domestic responsibilities of the household, which included hosting and maintaining diplomatic relationships. The everyday women during this time were also focused on their households and still under the direct control of their husbands and largely stayed out of the public sphere, confined to very busy lives at home. The First Lady is truly a cultural touchstone for the everyday woman to model herself after, as the First Lady is supposed to embody the dominant cultural expectations of womanhood during her time period. I think the role of the First Lady is really special. In the 19th and early 20th century, nowhere had we really seen a woman's opinion valued enough to change policy and have a say in the direction of the nation, regardless if this was publicized or not. These women are cheating the system, but women like Dolly Madison really took advantage of the undefined rules of the role. Dolly Madison was the wife of James Madison, and she served as First Lady from 1809 to 1817. Now, reading about Dolly Madison offers a real insight into just how powerful these women could become, especially in such an unofficial role. Although women in society were still restricted to life in the private sphere, Dolly worked really hard to blend both the private and the public sphere in her work, as well as use it to advance politically. She was the First Lady to open the door to women in a political context. At this point in time, Dolly Madison's opinions would change national and foreign policy, but she could not vote for her husband, and she wouldn't have been able to for another 103 years. She hosted parties, but she also made peace and strengthened relationships. She was very crafty in her seating arrangements. Dolly also served as an unofficial campaign manager for James Madison, and his election was strongly based on Dolly's intelligence, charisma, and network abilities, as well as her deep breadth of political knowledge. I like to think of her as James's wingwoman. She essentially did everything that James could not. I believe that Dolly has served as a pillar for American democracy. The The woman built new structures of government and created bipartisanship between the parties, and she truly just did amazing work. She's even regarded as being a teacher for the subsequent First Ladies, as she was so successful in her role. Of course, we don't often hear about a role that has been trivialized in our American history classes, unless maybe taught by Professor Doig. But I love seeing women play into the stereotypes that are set for them and use it to their advantage. Dolly was very aware of the gender norms of the time, and she used the hosting and the decorating and the domestic responsibilities to further advance diplomatic relationships and to advance James's career. Dolly was also successful in her efforts because she had a few things going for her. There were not many previous First Ladies, just 3 to be exact, and although this role hadn't been necessarily fleshed out, there were also gender norms that influenced her role. She also had her husband's support, and honestly, her husband wouldn't have been as successful as he was if he did not have Dolly by his side. And she also understood her potential. I know some First Ladies have written about how they really did not care for the experience, or there was a lot of pressure. They didn't necessarily understand how to navigate the role. But from what we can see throughout history is that Dolly was really successful in understanding how she was to work the system. And it is sad that women like Dolly don't get the credit, but because these women flew under the radar, that they were able to do what they did, and I believe now we are able to recognize their strengths and their abilities and their true influence on American democracy. Who would I be if I did not mention probably one of the most iconic women in history, who is probably the most popular First Lady? Eleanor Roosevelt. And Mrs. Roosevelt did an infinite amount of good in this world. I mean, from 1933 to 1945, she had a lot of time to accomplish many, many things. I could very well do an entire paper about Eleanor, but I will break down some of the struggles of the time period and what Eleanor did about them. Let's set the scene. It's 1933. World War II started a couple of years ago, FDR is elected president, and we also can't forget about the Great Depression and Prohibition ends, so it was a pretty big year. During the Great Depression, Eleanor traveled across the country to inspire the nation. She connected with communities of color, she supported civil rights groups, and she even invited those groups into the White House. She also did a lot of work for refugees and Jews during the Second World War, and the woman's action had positive consequences. She changed the way that white Americans saw people of color in America. She really focused on the grassroots efforts of America. She was a great role model during the time because women were working in 1933. Women were insulated from the job loss during the Great Depression because their fields of work were not strongly affected or connected to the stock market, as they worked in mostly domestic or clerical work. This is the double-edged sword of misogyny, don't get me wrong, but with women marrying less and working more, Eleanor served as a great woman to look up to. This is also a point that I think is interesting and not often recognized, is that First Ladies were the only women that other women got to see in a political nature. And because of their public image, they are a cultural touchstone for the everyday woman, as mentioned previously. And I would imagine that seeing a woman doing respected work is absolutely empowering, especially in 1933 when women are working more and more and becoming more independent. Eleanor still faced the dichotomy that a lot of First Ladies do. Although she was such a radical woman, she was still plagued with the expectations of the time. Although women were working, their jobs were seen significantly less than men's, and their pay reflected that as well. Eleanor Roosevelt is an iconic woman, and she deserves all of the credit and the respect that she has earned. The next woman I would really like to speak about is Michelle Obama. When I think of strong First Ladies, my mind immediately jumps to her. And it wasn't until I hit high school that I really began to admire her work. I really loved her dedication to the younger generations and her elegance. It was the first time that I personally had connected with the First Lady and saw her as the embodiment of womanhood during the time. On a less anecdotal note, Michelle Obama set her main initiative on Let's Move. She also focused on making school lunches healthier for public schools, and her Let's Move campaign was focused on getting medical professionals, parents, leaders, and educators to focus on the health of their families. She's also a mother, an advocate, and a lawyer. She's a champion of girls' education. She holds many, many titles. But I admire her not only because of the work that she has done, but because of the way that she is so proudly and foremost a woman. The 21st century has allowed women like Michelle Obama to lead with the fact that they are female, and that is important. Michelle Obama also speaks about the fact that she is proudly a mother, and that title holds value in itself, especially when she's doing political work. But I also think that it's interesting that there is still residual gender expectations for women like Michelle. And I assume that she too struggles with the balance of being a lady, but also being a feminist or being an advocate for women's issues that still aren't necessarily taken as seriously as other things. Ladies like Michelle Obama still handle the Christmas decorations, they're still reported on for their fashion, and they're still kind of pigeonholed to being a certain way. It is in such a negative light that many of these stereotypes are exemplified. I do think it's very important for girls to have a really positive and strong role model to look up to. I love the way that Michelle dresses. I think she is really stylish, and I really like how she presents herself. Although it can be reported in such a nasty and sexist way, at the same time, I am still really grateful that there are women in a position like the First Lady that I think is really special, and she gets the publicity she does, and I can still look up to her. The modernization of the role of the First Lady parallels the progress that we have seen with gender equality in the country, as women have been taken more and more seriously. First Ladies have been able to further expand their role the more that gender equality became relevant in society. First Ladies have had a strong presence in the White House, and their influence has shifted the needle between more equitable marriages between men and women, and also, once again, providing a positive role model for women working in a political sphere and promoting female-led advocacy and leadership. In an interview, First Lady Laura Bush stated that the role of the First Lady was whatever she wanted it to be, which I think is a powerful statement, and it's also complicated because there are things tethered to the role of the First Lady. There are customs, there are expectations, but also every First Lady is different, and the way that she chooses to exercise her power and the extent that she plays into the gender norms or that she defies them is so different between every single one of them. Undoubtedly, these women walk a tight line between working in an official and unofficial capacity, between hostess and advocate, between lady and feminist, and the lack of definition in the role can be empowering, but also difficult to navigate. And I want to reiterate that these women hold a very special position, and it is unlike any other role in government. And those stereotypes that I first held, or that I had in mind when I thought about the First Lady, were immediately dispelled once I looked into even a couple articles about them. First Ladies are just misunderstood and often dismissed because no one really understands how their role operates. But I think that they deserve a lot more credit. Being the partner of the person who holds the highest office in the country is really difficult. It comes along with a lot of scrutiny and unforeseen consequences, positive or not. I believe that the lack of credit that these women are given do a disservice to both the women who hold those positions as well as girls like me, and I assume some of you, who look up to the First Ladies. But it is very important to see them as far more than just arm candy on a man or as a wife in the White House. They do significantly more and have such a strong impact on American history, and yet we don't often credit these women like we really should. My main purpose of my project was to delve deeper into the history of the First Ladies and understand their position a lot more, as well as understand their significance and the gender stereotypes that come along with working as a partner in the White House. Thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope you appreciate the First Ladies just as much as I do, and I would appreciate any and all feedback. Thank you very much.